This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether it's your new profession or just a lifelong passion, start your journey to website glory with Squarespace. Check out their amazing all-in-one platform through the link below. More on them in a bit. Is the dark mirror image of our world, an evil twin nearly identical in size and mass that somehow managed to evolve into an uninhabitable hellscape. The second brightest object in the night sky, Venus has been an icon since ancient times. The morning star, the only planet named after a goddess, a place where, for decades, we projected our hopes of finding life beyond Earth, perhaps in the form of humid swamplands. Alas, when we finally got our first look at Venus, it wasn't at a living world, but at a place even more inhospitable than Mars. Shrouded with clouds of searing acid, blasted by hurricane-force winds, and baking at temperatures hot enough to melt lead, the second planet is a vision from Bruegel's darkest nightmares. A place so inimical to life, it'd make even Los Angeles seem livable. Yet Venus is more than just the planetary equivalent of an angry elder god. It's also a mystery. Billions of years ago, scientists think that Venus looked like Earth, a temperate water world, with oceans that existed for uncountable eons. Solving how it became the nightmare that we see today could have staggering implications for our own planet's future. Seen up there in the morning sky, easily visible to the naked eye, Venus is almost a thing of poetry. The second brightest nighttime object after our moon, the planet has been beguiling humans since the dawn of time, a constant feature in myth and in legend. In the realm of science too, Venus has drawn our eye, so similar is she to our own world. At 12,104 kilometers across, Venus is only a hair smaller than Earth. In terms of mass too, the second planet is close, about 82% that of Earth. Now compare this to our other rocky neighbor Mars, a planet only half Earth's size with a mere 15% of its mass. If the four terrestrial planets can be said to be family, then Mercury and Mars are cousins at best, while Venus and Earth are basically twins. At least that's how it looks from a distance. Get closer to our sibling though, and your opinion might start to change. Rather than a pair of Weasley brothers, Earth and Venus are more like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The first thing to note about our world's evil twin is that she has a strange orbit. Spinning through space at a distance of 108 million kilometers from the Sun, Venus moves backwards on its journey, traveling in the opposite direction to every other planet except snigger-inducing Uranus. Nor can Venus exactly be said to be spinning. Venus rotates slowly, so slowly it takes nearly 8 Earth months for a single day to pass on Venus. This creates a completely counterintuitive situation where a Venusian day actually lasts longer than a Venusian year. Yet the oddness doesn't stop here. Because it barely has a tilt, Venus lacks seasons, so your average day on Planet 2 would start with the sun rising in the west thanks to its backward motion, and then hanging in the sky for endless, unchanging months before finally sinking below the eastern horizon and plunging you into months of darkness. And that's a darkness without even a moon to light it, since Venus lacks any satellites. By the time the sun finally rose again, you'd have already celebrated your first year on Venus. Not that you'd have really much to celebrate. Of all the terrestrial planets, Venus is perhaps the only one that seems to actively hate life. While Mercury is blasted by proximity to the sun and Mars is cold and barren, Venus is what would happen if God suddenly handed all duties over to the angriest comments section. From the upper atmosphere all the way to the grounds, with one minor exception that we'll talk about later, the second planet is aggressively hostile to all known forms of life. Made up of 95% carbon dioxide, the atmosphere itself is thick and suffocating. Further down, a dense layer of clouds occupies the space between 45 to 70 kilometers above the surface. But those aren't the fluffy kind of clouds that we get here on Earth. Made of sulfuric acid, Venus's clouds are so corrosive they can devour anything they touch. Even reinforced metal would not last long. Up here, winds blast at hurricane force. Were you to take off your helmet and sniff that wind, the sulfur would smell like rotten eggs, effectively making it feel like you were trapped inside a gigantic fart. Depressingly, this might be the highlight of your trip to Venus. As Scientific American memorably put it of our twin surface, no matter which part you visited, you would die a quick but agonizing death. Thanks to a runaway greenhouse effect, Venus traps heat so effectively it's the hottest planet in the solar system, reaching temperatures not even Mercury can dream of. On the ground, the air clocks in at 480 degrees Celsius, so hot the acid rain from the clouds evaporates long before it reaches the surface, so hot the rocks give off a dull, near-infrared glow that can be seen from space. Interestingly, without its greenhouse effect, Venus would be more temperate, around 90 degrees Celsius. Still too hot for humans, but not beyond other forms of life. Sadly, the thick atmosphere does more than keep the heat in. It also creates insane pressure. On Venus, the surface pressure is so intense it's equivalent to standing under 1.6 kilometers of water. Far from an ideal holiday destination. Yet, despite all of this nastiness, there are plenty of scientists who'd kill for a chance to examine the Venusian surface up close. That's because ground-level Venus is remarkably young. The entire planet seems to have been resurfaced, perhaps as recently as 150 million years ago. No one knows quite how this happens, just as no one knows for sure if the planet's thousands of volcanoes are still active, although there is good circumstantial evidence. However, the greatest mystery about our cosmic twin isn't its surface or whether its volcanoes still go boom. It's how it got like this in the first place. Given Venus's outward similarities to Earth, a whole lot of clever folk are a whole lot of curious about why our solar system isn't home to two inhabitable planets, especially since there's evidence Planet 2 may have been inhabitable in the distant past. When NASA's Pioneer probe visited in the late 1970s, it reported back an atmosphere filled with heavy water, a form of regular water that comes with an extra neutron added to its hydrogen. Unlike H2O, heavy water is less likely to evaporate away into space, leading scientists to suspect it's been hanging around in the Venusian atmosphere for some time. The most likely explanation? This vapor is all that remains of what were once planet-wide oceans. Now, what we're about to say comes with the planet-sized caveat that it's based on incomplete data. Compared to Mars, Venus is almost woefully understudied. The future missions we'll be talking about in the final chapter of today's video are going to fill in the blanks, but for now, we're relying on less than optimal models to suss out the past. That being said, though, the folks at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies have run some seriously complex computer simulations, and they think they've narrowed it down to two possible stories. One, Venus's oceans never stood a chance. Or two, that this was, in fact, a living world right up until a moment of calamity. So let's start with theory number one, that Venus was doomed from its very birth. In this telling, Venus formed in the inner solar system, just like Earth. Two twins emerging from the darkness. For billions of years, they even looked alike. Two spheres riven with belching volcanoes and magma oceans under heavy asteroid bombardment. But then, their paths suddenly split. Further out in the darkness, Earth began to settle down, began to cool. The water vapor became seas, churning with complex chemicals that eventually gave rise to life. Meanwhile, Venus was simply too close to the sun to have a chance. So near our parent star, Venus never cooled enough to allow water vapor to turn to liquid. Indeed, it worked with the carbon dioxide emitted by the volcanoes to create the beginnings of the greenhouse effect that we see today, an effect that ensured the surface just got hotter and hotter. So that's theory number one, what we'll call the doomed Venus scenario. But there's another theory too, one that raises all sorts of tantalizing possibilities. According to this tale, our newborn sun brightened only slowly in its infancy, allowing Venus time to cool alongside Earth. That meant Venus also gained what Earth did: rivers, lakes, and oceans, a water cycle, rainstorms, great crashing waterfalls tumbling over alien cliffs. If this version is true, then there was a point, around 4 billion years ago, when Earth, Mars, and Venus all had surface oceans. Not just one pale blue dot in space, but rather three. Now, if you've watched our video on Mars, you'll understand why this is quite so exciting. Right now, NASA is intently examining the red planet for signs of microbial life that may have formed in the deltas of ancient Mars. It's why they sent the Perseverance rover there. Why one of the blockbuster missions of the next decade will be to return the samples to Earth for study. And here's the kicker. Mars is thought to have supported surface water for a mere 500 million years. Venus, by contrast, may have existed as an ocean world for up to 3 billion. Given what we know about the evolution of life on Earth, that's plenty of time for microbes to have evolved, potentially even more complex creatures. Is the tantalizing vision behind future exploration of Venus the idea that, in the dim and distant past, two planets waltzed through the heavens together, each not just inhabitable, but inhabited? Of course, this didn't last. This theory assumes our twin died when multiple supervolcanoes erupted in the same time span, belching out carbon dioxide for thousands upon thousands of years until the greenhouse effect took hold and Venus warmed herself to death. We know on Earth the volcanoes played a part in all our mass extinctions, barring the meteorite impact that KO'd the dinosaurs. Now it seems maybe Venus was just unlucky enough to suffer the biggest extinction event of all. Impressively, finding out which of these two theories is true could have practical implications. We know that many of the exoplanets discovered so far are rocky worlds the size of Earth or Venus. If we can discover why Venus became a hellscape, it might help us figure out how likely it is that these exoplanets suffered the same fate, whether they are a bunch of potential Earths, potentially hosting life, or just a bunch of overheated, uninhabitable Venuses. Well, we say uninhabitable, but that might not be quite right, because there's one part of Planet 2 that we've so far avoided talking about, a part that may just turn everything we know about Venus on its head. The part that, incredibly, may support life. This is the age of creation. Think about it. Everyone is out there making something. We're no longer just consuming stuff online. We're making it as well. And you've probably either got a great idea for a website or a business yourself, or you know someone who does. And when it's time to move that project from your head to the screen in front of you, well, that's where Squarespace comes in. It's the perfect web tool to help you fashion the internet into whatever you want it to be. Maybe the hands-on type with lots of opinions and ideas about what exactly your website should look like. If so, very cool. Squarespace gives you all the customization options you could ever want with no updates, no patches, no technical BS to worry about. Or maybe you just need something functional, something that works with minimal thought so you can stay focused on the content and not the coat of paint. Just use one of their quick, beautiful templates to make a website that's both fresh and simple. And once you're done setting up your website, locking in the name, maybe playing with some of the colors, there's tons of extra features that Squarespace provides so your site can thrive. Email campaigns, patronage portals, social integrations, member-only areas, analytics, commercial options, 24/7 customer support. Really, everything you could ever want is in one place. So when you're ready to get started on the next project of yours, big or small, if it involves a website, do it with Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your new site, go to squarespace.com/geographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now back to today's video. Alright, look, we get it. We just spent 2 chapters banging on about how inimical to life Venus is. And now we're doing the YouTube equivalent of a rug pull and saying, but, well, what if? In our defense, this isn't our fault. The majority of planetary scientists really do think that Venus has about as much life in it as a Guardian reader's dinner party. But a majority is not the same as everyone. There exists a minority of experts who believe microbial creatures could still be living in Venus's clouds. That's because Venus does weird things at a certain altitude. After being a constant nightmare of heat and acid and high pressure, there's a sudden thin band about 50 kilometers up where things are basically kind of fine. At this height, the scorching temperature drops between 30 and 70 Celsius. The pressure is equivalent to standing at sea level on Earth. There's even water vapor that hypothetical microorganisms could survive on. The best part? This band of habitability extends around the entire planet. As a wise man once said, given the right conditions, life, finds a way. Of course, there's still the sulfuric acid to worry about, which exists at concentrations that would kill any extremophile currently known. At the same time, though, we've had occasional glimpses of evidence that might suggest something is indeed living up there. On their dedicated Venus page, NASA goes into a lot of detail about the dark streaks that exist in the sulfur clouds, streaks that don't seem to disperse in the powerful winds and absorb ultraviolet radiation. While they're almost certainly some kind of weird natural effect, some astrobiologists think that they might be colonies of microbes clinging together and living off the water vapor. The theory goes that these creatures have a kind of chemical coating that stops the acid from destroying them, a coating that also absorbs ultraviolet light. To back up their claims, astrobiologists point to readings taken by some of the Soviet probes. The probes found particles that were roughly the same size as bacteria tend to be on Earth, although they lacked the tools to report if they really were microorganisms. Astrobiologists also point to something far more controversial, something you might dimly remember from the depths of the pandemic years. The September 2020 announcement that scientists had discovered in the Venusian clouds a chemical signature of life. The story around this is kind of messy, but it goes something like this. Phosphine is a toxic gas that's often a byproduct of lightning and volcanism. However, it's also produced by microbes. When a team of scientists started examining the gases in Venus's atmosphere in the late 2010s, they found more phosphine than could reasonably come from natural processes. A lot more. What's more, that phosphine was being constantly replenished rather than breaking down in sunlight. This led to the exciting possibility that Venus's clouds are full of microbes expelling phosphine as a waste product. If that's the case, then these bacteria are likely the last remnants of the life that swarmed and multiplied in Venus's water. Life that had no choice but to rise upward and adapt as the surface became uninhabitable. When the study was published in 2020, it caused a sensation. The idea that after fruitless decades searching on Mars, we'd find life on Venus, well, it was just too juicy to resist. Sadly, it turned out the claims were kinda complicated. Today, just 2 years later, the 2020 study is unbelievably controversial. Many experts say that the authors didn't detect phosphine at all, and instead simply misclassified sulfur dioxide. Others think that maybe the phosphine is real, but that there just isn't enough water vapor, and there's way too much acid in Venus's clouds to even support the hardiest extremophiles. At the time of recording, the argument is still raging, as it likely will until we actually drop a specialized probe into Venus's clouds and find out for sure. Luckily, such a scenario is far from fanciful. After all, we humans have been now exploring the second planet for decades. Over the last 2 decades, Mars has been the golden boy of the planetary family, the one that gets all the orbiters, rovers, and funky little robot helicopters. So, it can come as a surprise to realize that this wasn't always the case. Back when NASA was selecting the very first planet to explore with a probe, they were not with our warlike cousin, but with Venus. Launched in the summer of 1962, Mariner 2 holds a hallowed place in the history of space exploration. The first craft to ever visit another planet, it reached Venus on December the 14th of that same year, conducting a 42-minute flyby that set the stage for every probe since. In that time, it managed to transmit a ream of data as impressive as it was heartbreaking. It was Mariner 2 that confirmed what scientists like Carl Sagan had long suspected, that Venus is so brutally, miserably hot that any lingering hopes of alien swamps existing beneath its cloud tops were definitively smashed. Combined with Mariner 4 revealing how dead the surface of Mars was just 2 years later, it was a body blow to everyone's dreams of one day living in a real-life version of Star Trek. Still, the probes to Venus didn't stop, in large part because Planet 2 now found itself an unwitting flashpoint in the space race. Even as they scrambled to put a man on the moon, the Americans and Soviets were likewise racing to unlock the mysteries of Venus. It was a race the Soviets excelled at, one in which they played Usain Bolt to America's Paul Blart. Over the following years, Moscow sent probe after probe to our cosmic twin, plenty of them scoring brand new firsts. There was Venera 3, which became the first human craft on another planet when it smashed into Venus's surface in 1966, destroying itself. 4 years later, Venera 7 executed a controlled landing, becoming the first probe to pull off a successful touchdown on another world. Overall, the USSR would spend the 1970s landing 10 probes on Venus, yet each time the mission would run into an inevitable problem. Not only was Venus hostile to life, it seemed to delight in destroying spacecraft. The hardiest of all, Venera 13, lasted a mere 2 hours before the heat and pressure turned it into molten junk. While the Venera missions managed to beam back some images of the Venusian surface showing a blasted rocky world boiling under a sickly yellow sky, the sheer brutal nature of Venus made return trips fool's errands. The final ever spacecraft to touch down on Venus in 1985 survived less than an hour, which may be why NASA stopped trying to replicate Soviet successes and instead turned its attention to orbiters. Probes that simply circle an astronomical body taking readings, orbiters are great for both longer-term study and not getting destroyed by extreme surface conditions. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't challenges. Venus's clouds are so thick that any orbiter requires seriously good radar to examine what lies below them. But it was a challenge NASA was capable of meeting, most spectacularly in the form of Magellan. Of all the probes sent to the second planet, Magellan is the big one, the technological granddaddy. For 4 years, it flew high above the cloud tops of Venus, mapping the surface in what was then stunning detail, returning images of a hidden world unlike anything anyone had expected. When its mission finally ended in 1994, Magellan was one of NASA's great success stories. For the first time, it felt like we'd gotten to meet Earth's twin, to understand her, to witness her silent volcanoes and vast fields of basalt in awe. Sadly, it was the same success that doomed any hopes of America returning. Just as we were truly discovering what a miserable, toxic environment Venus offered, NASA was making very different discoveries about Mars. In 1996, scientists revealed they discovered what appeared to be fossilized microbes in a piece of Martian meteorite named ALH 84001. Although considered these days to have been a false alarm, the announcement nonetheless touched off a Mars craze, one which saw mountains of money directed toward the rovers and orbiters now on the Red Planet, hunting for signs of ancient life. With the spotlight firmly moved to Planet 4, it would be 3 long decades before NASA considered going back to Venus again. In June 2021, a spell was finally broken, a dark spell that had been haunting the planetary science community for years. Known as the Venus Curse, that spell had shattered endless dreams with its evil simplicity. Every time a proposed mission to the second planet had been submitted to NASA, it failed to get funding. As 11 orbiters and 8 landers were sent to Mars, as projects were pushed forward to visit Pluto, Ceres, Europa, Titan, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, the Sun, and more, poor Venus languished. Lesser beloved twin, and more that crappy sibling that you just never call. That's not to say nobody was interested. From 2006 to 2014, a European mission orbited our celestial sister. A year later, a Japanese probe arrived. But NASA just kept saying nope. Notorious among Venus fans, this included the 2017 selection of 2 asteroid missions, Lucy and Psyche, over a pair of dedicated Venus probes. At that point, it probably seemed like the curse was never going to be lifted. And then came that warm June day, a day when most headlines were still dominated with COVID case counts and vaccination rates. The day NASA unveiled twin picks for its latest Discovery-class missions. These are cheapish projects with budgets up to $500 million. And it turned out 2 Venus probes had won. And just like that, Planet 2 was sexy all over again. Amazingly, this wasn't the only good news for Team Venus that month. Just 2 weeks later, the European Space Agency, ESA, announced its own dedicated mission. This means that at the time of recording, we have 3 dedicated crafts in the pipeline that will all visit Venus in the next 12 years, and each one, in its own way, will utterly transform our understanding of our sibling. The first to arrive will be NASA's Veritas, an incredibly unconvincing anagram of Venus Emissivity Radioscience INSAR Topography and Spectroscopy. Luckily, what it lacks in graceful naming, it more than makes up for with sheer technological awesomeness. From the moment it enters orbit in the summer of 2028, Veritas will be undertaking a mapping project that will reveal Venus's surface in detail so fine it barely seems believable. While they were impressive back in the 90s, Magellan's images are kind of blurry by modern standards. Veritas's, by contrast, will drill down to a resolution of 15 meters, the equivalent of watching a movie in 4K HD that you've previously only ever seen on VHS. This will give us the sort of highly detailed surface map we already have for Mars, potentially telling us all sorts of fascinating things about Venus's formation, especially when used in conjunction with the ESA's Envision probe. While Veritas will map the whole of Venus in high detail, Envision, arriving in 2034, will only look in detail at a handful of specific spots. But what detail? Instead of 15 meters, Envision's radar will give a resolution of just 1 meter, so close that we'll likely be able to see the remains of the old Soviet probes. To return to our analogy, this will be like taking a single scene from your 4K HD movie and watching it in IMAX. The detail will just be off the charts. Beyond that, both Veritas and Envision will measure the internal structure of Venus, and both hunt for evidence that Venus once had surface oceans. A positive result could forever settle the debate over the planet's past. But while the orbiters are cool, it's the middle project that you should be most excited about. Known as Da Vinci, NASA's final probe will arrive in 2031 between Veritas and Envision, and while it will include an orbiter kitted out to study Venus in infrared, the really awesome part is going to be the lander. At some point in 2032, Da Vinci is going to drop a probe down into Venus's atmosphere, one that's designed to uncover the secrets of those possibly life-supporting clouds. In a controlled descent, Da Vinci will inhale all of the fumes that Venus has to offer, analyzing them, studying them for things like noble gases, for water vapor, for phosphine, potentially even for signs of life. That done, the probe will zip below the clouds and swoop low, taking the first highly detailed pictures of the Venusian surface since the last Soviet lander. Finally, Da Vinci will touch down on this blasted hellscape and spend its last hours beaming back data on mineral composition before, at last, succumbing to the heat and to the pressure. And with its death, we should not only get the most detailed up-close images of Venus's surface we've ever seen, but also, perhaps, confirmation of extreme microbial life. In short, this is an incredibly exciting time for our celestial twin, and it could be about to get even more exciting. Right now, NASA's Glenn Research Center is working on something called LLISSE, an extremely durable probe that, when completed, should be able to survive on the Venusian surface not for hours or even days, but for 2 whole months. Just creating a piece of kit that can withstand such heat and pressure for so long is impressive. More impressive, though, is what a stationary probe could learn about our sister planet over the course of 60 days. And while NASA currently has no plan to use it, this probe will be offered to partner nations, to space programs like those in Europe, Japan, or India that may want to make use of it. With Veritas, Envision, and Da Vinci making Venus cool again, someone will hopefully take up the offer. And so, as this video ends, it does so on the threshold of a new era, one that will likely see our understanding of Venus evolve so much that everything we've just told you will look hopelessly out of date in just 10 years' time. And that's a magical feeling, a reminder that for all of our ability to kill one another and generally be a bit shitty, humans are also capable of amazing feats, of unlocking the secrets of our solar system. We can only hope that this is the beginning of a broader Venus renaissance, one that will see us finally reconnect with our estranged twin for good.